Two documentaries, A Bit of a Stranger by Svetlana Lishchinska and Intercepted by Oksana Karpovich, deploy different aesthetic means to different ends. Taken together, they show the war at its two extremes, at its most personal in the former and at its most dehumanizing in the latter. Lishchinska's film depicts 4 generations in her Russian-speaking, Mariupol-based family. Her aging mother, Valentina, who grew up in the Soviet Union, Svetlana herself, who came of age as Ukraine found its independence and later moved to Kiev, her daughter Sasha, who remembers an absent mother as she stayed behind in Mariupol, and a young infant, Steffi. By sheer luck, Valentina ends up in Kiev for Steffi's birthday on the eve of the invasion and is able to avoid the destruction of her home city. Later, Sasha and Steffi end up in London, safe from danger. The film then follows how the family responds to the challenge and trauma imposed upon them, particularly how the Russian or Russified aspects of their identity become fragmented in the wake of the full-scale invasion. Svetlana is a steadfast, ever-present recordist, filming large chunks of her daily life and able to draw on an impressive personal archive of home video from the 90s onwards. One particularly potent moment comes when we're treated to images of Sasha watching King Charles's Christmas speech in London.
I wish each of you a Christmas of peace, happiness, and everlasting light.
Followed by the scene of a family in Mariupol on New Year's Eve 2007 watching Putin's presidential address. The two together, alongside earlier scenes of Ukraine's National Day before the invasion, throw into sharp relief how constructed and hierarchical national identity building is. And yet, in spite of their artificiality, these constructs have very real effects, not just on existential issues like the Russian invasion, but in smaller, more personal ways.
Я могу там примазываться, что-то пытаться, ходить по левой стороне, но я все равно не стану. И так же здесь. То есть я смотрю, классно, меня даже может что-то восторгать, даже что-то мне нравится. А вот это их, но это их. Это меня как бы не касается.
All in all, Svetlana Lishchinska's A Bit of a Stranger confronts the imperialistic elements of Russian and Soviet influence on Ukrainians. At the same time, though, it also embraces its multilingual and multicultural elements, producing a complex, ambiguous, cross-generational portrait of a family of women. In complete contrast stands Oksana Karpovich's Intercepted. This film is comprised almost entirely of scenes from present-day Ukraine, such as shots of bombed-out buildings or tracking shots from a car amidst debris-strewn streets. Overlaid on top are phone calls intercepted by Ukrainian military intelligence from Russian soldiers to their families back home. The majority of these phone calls are deeply unpleasant, speaking freely of violence, looting, and murder. Many of these soldiers highlight the difference between Putin's propaganda at home and the reality on the ground, as they talk to mothers expecting to hear of glorious victories, only to be told their sons are hungry, cold, and bogged down in mud. But despite the open confessions of the many war crimes and atrocities committed, remarkably few Russian soldiers offer any form of remorse. As we hear from these soldiers, many but not all displaying little to no guilt or shame, we witness the aftermath of their actions. There's a distance and hollowness at play here. The images rarely feature people, and when they do, they are far from the camera. This combination then reflects a sense of dehumanization. We are encountering the Ukrainians partly through the mouths of the Russians.
Алло.
Да.
Чё у вас?
Как у тебя дела?
It's a difficult and risky thing to attempt in a documentary of this nature, but on reflection, Intercepted succeeds because it never fetishizes or accentuates this suffering. And though the aesthetic choices are simple, they are more than enough to produce a powerful commentary on just how banal and normalized this dehumanization is. Dehumanization forms one of the themes of Pavel Mozart's Unwanted Kinship, a short film which also screened at Berlinale last year. Mozart, a Belarusian living in Berlin since the age of 10, uses testimony from Ukrainian civilians of Russian brutality, reenacting the events either with actors or plastic figurines, but always refraining from direct depictions of violence.
Коли ми говорили російським солдатам «Вертайтеся додому», вони відповідали «Та ми вже вдома» або «Ми вже в Росії».
In a voiceover speaking German, Mozart narrates his complicated feelings around the notion of collective guilt, an experience he is challenged by coming from Belarus, one of Russia's key military allies in its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Mozart asks himself to what extent he is complicit, and through his aesthetic choices brings the film text into question, asking to what extent is the depiction of violence itself a form of complicity. These questions have long proliferated through cinema, yet just as equally we might ask, who do these images belong to? Unwanted Kinship is a German film by country of production, and whilst Intercepted and A Bit of a Stranger may have been shot in Ukraine, both are largely funded by cultural foundations in more well-off Western European countries. Granted, Ukraine's own capacity to produce films is severely limited at the moment, but there is a risk here of Ukrainian cinema being defined not by Ukrainians but by the cultural assumptions of decision-making funding bodies far from the country itself. These funding structures can have a tendency to fund the kinds of films most comfortably digested by Western audiences, often those which flatten cultural specificities into more easily exportable tropes. The long-term risk here is that of a cinema largely predicated on war trauma, poverty, and suffering, produced for the well-heeled suits of a festival audience, a fate that has befallen, for example, post-Yugoslav cinema, modern African cinema targeted at major festivals, or even the post-communist cinema of Eastern Europe, where protagonists are often framed solely through their suffering. All three of Unwanted Kinship, Intercepted, and A Bit of a Stranger find ways to reject this impetus. One film to have also escaped from this trap is Roman Bondarchuk's jet black satire, The Editorial Office, set 6 months before the full-scale invasion. Here we follow Yura, played by Dmytro Banenko, an environmental researcher who witnesses an arson attack in the dunes outside of the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson. He takes his photos to a local news site where the editor quietly shuts down the arson story. Yura, meanwhile, finds himself dragged into an increasingly Kafkaesque world of local corruption, political collusion, and outright misinformation. Unlike the rest of the films outlined in this piece, this is not a documentary, but as a film concerned with how news media is manufactured, it is equally concerned with factuality. Roman Bondarchuk is already established as a keen satirist with a couple of features under his belt. He is masterful in his blocking and composition, using long takes to extend a sense of surreal unease to the way the characters interact with each other, nobody ever being quite sure who or what to believe.
Що тут взагалі відбувається?
Не знаю.
Roman Bondarchuk's final assessment that a Ukraine susceptible to misinformation and manipulation is equally susceptible to sensationalized half-truths is timely, especially given the long-term question of who will shape Ukraine's historical narrative. because one can only hope Ukrainian cinema continues to grow in complexity and richness and does so on its own terms. But despite the fracture of its domestic cultural infrastructure, if the films emerging today are of any indication, the cinema of Ukraine is not only surviving, it is evolving, defiant in the face of simplification and insistent on its right to be seen in all its depth and complexity. Perhaps the task then for those outside is not to shape that direction, but to listen to the filmmakers already redefining how Ukraine is seen and how it sees itself. If you'd like to personally experience some of the great work being produced by Ukrainian filmmakers, visit Klassiki.online now to view our full collection of Ukrainian films within our broader library of Eastern European cinema. And what's more is that you can view any of our titles for free as part of our 7-day free trial. Anything from hidden Soviet gems to avant-garde shorts to critically acclaimed contemporary films fresh off the festival circuit. Follow the link in the description now to learn more.